Welcome to the Grief Pod with Venetia Clack. This is a weekly podcast which looks at every aspect of something which has or will at some point affect us all. And that is grief. Whether you've lost a loved one or about to lose someone you know, or perhaps you're simply trying to help someone navigate their grief and don't know where to start or what to say, then perhaps this is the podcast for you. Each week I'll be bringing you different stories and experiences of loss, love, hope and at times humour. In 2009, news broadcaster and journalist Breffni Clack's son Noah was born sleeping. This was her 7th pregnancy. All of her previous pregnancies had ended at 12 or 14 weeks and one as late as 24 weeks. Now, Breffni, you're joining me on this episode. You've never spoken about this before. No. So I think, first of all, your 7 pregnancies.
Yeah, each one was
none
a grief.
Was viable.
Each one was a grief. Each one was a difficult pregnancy from the start. Not one was viable, no. So medically, they couldn't find anything wrong. Medically, it was just one of those things that could possibly happen. And then there was, well, maybe we'll try some kind of aspirin, maybe that'll happen. Then there was D&Cs, which I know a lot of women go through, to make the environment, as it's called, more susceptible for another pregnancy. And again, so you're grieving, but you're also hoping. You're hoping that maybe the next pregnancy will be the one. And they were spread over a number of years. It wasn't just one after the other. So it took me months on one pregnancy to try, even think about trying again. And then my last 3 pregnancies were all in quick succession. So they were 2 12-week pregnancies. Wow. were lost. And then suddenly I got to 14 weeks, 18 weeks, 24 weeks with Noah. And I could feel the pain, the stress in myself going, oh my God, get me through this, please get me the next week. And the pregnancy was phenomenal. I was healthy. All the doctors were absolutely thrilled with me. Everything went brilliantly.
So textbook.
Textbook, really. I was even sick. I had all my morning sickness. I had everything that I was supposed to happen. And And then I just got these pains one day, and I was at that stage, I was 38 weeks. And I thought, oh, here we go, it's muscular, or it could be Braxton Hicks, so on and so forth. And I really felt very unwell then. So I thought, am I going into labour? So I thought, this is it. I rang my GP, and she said, oh, I think all that back pain, I think you're going into labour. So it went straight into Holles Street, and I was excited. Now, there had been a couple of weeks where I wasn't feeling much because Noah was breech.
Okay.
So
that's pretty standard.
Pretty standard, and they weren't concerned. And you're getting you get these crazy little tips. Go on your hands and knees and shine a torch where you shouldn't be shining a torch. And it's kind of like, okay,
or drink loads of cans of Coke.
All of that sort of get the baby moving and get him whatever. So there were days where I wouldn't have felt much, but that was down to the breech. So there was no worry on that. The last ultrasound had been perfect and everything was working. Got into Holles Street. I was excited. I saw, here I'm in labour. And then I kept thinking to myself, should I be in more pain for labour? And I thought, well, maybe I'm just being lucky here. Maybe I'm not. And I just saw her face. I just looked she did an ultrasound, and I just looked at her face. And she went out of the room to call somebody. And I remember looking at my partner at the time going, something's really, really wrong here. He said, no, it's fine. The next thing, this gynae came in and just said, there's no heartbeat. And I remember looking at her going, what do you mean there's no heartbeat? There was a heartbeat last week. There was a heartbeat my last checkup. Why is there? And I just couldn't in my mind make sense of how I got through this whole pregnancy, and all of a sudden gone, just like that. I mean, the snap of a finger, it was just gone.
The last hurdle.
When you think you're going to be safe, but No, and that was it. I think the hardest part, apart from the knowledge of that, I mean, my first instinct was, okay, now, can we do this now? Oh no, I had to go home. I had to go home for 2 days. Their theory behind it was for me to get my head around it, and B, to induce me. I wanted a cesarean. That was just my gut instinct. I need this gone. I need this over.
Yeah.
I couldn't. And I'll never forget, I think I was numb for days. Until then I got the tablet to induce me, and then back into Hollis Street to give birth to him. And
that was like 40 weeks, pretty
absolutely
much. So
full
you'd
term.
gone through all the jitters of we're nearly at 12, we're nearly at 14, and the scary time. Because when you get to 12 weeks, or, you know, that's the sort of safe time where you sort of feel...
Yeah, so they say, but I knew that wasn't the safe time because I got to 14 weeks and then the pregnancy.
Several times before.
Several times. And then I got to 24 weeks. And when you have that, 12 weeks, you don't have that bump, really.
Yeah.
24 weeks, you're very pregnant. You feel pregnant. But I was so afraid at that stage to even hold on to that, even at 24 weeks. And then just going into the 25th week. And that's a late miscarriage at that stage. It's not a stillbirth.
Yeah.
It's a late miscarriage. So it was early miscarriages and late miscarriages. But they were really confident and really comfortable with me this time. There's many reasons why women have baby. I like to say babies born sleeping because it gives me a little bit of comfort. I find it quite an old-fashioned term, stillborn.
And it's sort of cold.
It is quite cold.
Yeah. What happened then? So you went home, obviously in numb, going,
and
you know, I assume you have people calling you or texting you going, how are you feeling, or any news?
Yeah, there was a lot of that. I kind of locked myself down a little bit. My GP was great at the time. She came and started dishing out the Valium, which was very much needed. I'll never forget my mother-in-law. We were never the closest at the best of times. But I'll never forget opening the glass doors to her, and she said, where's the baby? And I said, well, I'm still carrying him. And she went, what? They let you home and you're still carrying the baby? And I was like, I'm at my front door and you're bombarding me. And she said, oh, I can't believe this has happened to my son.
Right.
And I just went, well, actually, it's happened to both of us.
Yeah.
You know, this is... And I think a lot of people forget about the men. So I don't...
They do. They do. And we'll probably talk about that in a little while. But just getting back to that day, you go home, you have the 2 days... And then you have to give birth to Noah.
Yeah, you're in a
and then
very
you have to
strange
go home
land,
again, but
empty.
without your baby.
Yeah. They're very good in hospital. They're very good in Hollis Street. My particular experience, some people have had horrible experiences with different hospitals. I was quite lucky, the experience I had. But yeah, they induce you, you go into labour, and you're put in a room by yourself. So you're not on a ward with other women giving birth. Your partner's with you the whole time. It was my husband at the time, and they're supportive. But it doesn't take away from the fact that you go into full-blown labour. And
nothing to show for it.
And nothing to show for it. You go into that delivery room and you go through the pain, as we all know, the pain of birth. And it's quite difficult with the baby that's not moving at the same time. So you're pushing, the baby isn't helping.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like a dead weight.
Yeah.
It's even worse. But I always think my mum had died 2 years at that stage, and I always think she was there holding my hand or holding just her hand over me that day, because that labour was so fast, within an hour. From induction to giving birth to Noah. So I got through it as quickly as possible. But the silence in that labour ward, the silence, nothing, absolutely nothing. Everybody held their breath. The two midwives, my husband, myself, we all held our breaths. And you're waiting, even though you know, you're waiting for
just
a cry.
In case, just in
case somebody got it wrong. And I remember they wrapped him up and just said to me, do you want to hold him? And there was this this animal instinct in me, and I just went, no, I couldn't. I actually, at that moment in time, I just couldn't. It was like I put my hand going, no. I felt quite animalistic, like an animal. If you've ever seen an animal push something dead away from them. Now, by the time I came down off all the hormones, whatever, within half an hour, I wanted to see him, I wanted to hold him. They brought him to me in a crib, and I kept him for 24 hours, which was very, very important in the grieving process, to be able to look at him, to be able to hold him. The family came in and they held him as well. And we planned a funeral when we should have been planning, a celebration.
And I just think, when you have kids and you remember that moment, it's one of the moments you always remember in life.
Pure
is
joy.
The day they're born and the afterwards. And I actually meeting your baby for the first time, but then also having to say goodbye to it must be the most incredible, difficult thing to do.
It was, I think, I would say the most difficult thing I've ever gone through. Obviously, I'd lost previous babies, but to me, they weren't fully formed. The pregnancy wasn't fully formed. The bond wasn't there. The kicking. I mean, there's a certain song that I would hear that was out at the time, and and he'd kick along to it. I hear that song now, I nearly die. Even now, 15 years later, I'm like, it'll crush my chest.
And then you go home.
You go home without your baby, and you go home still with your breast full of milk.
Yeah.
Still with all the after effects of pregnancy, and you don't know how to start again. And what I found is I just wanted to cry and talk. I'd lost my own mother, so I'd no female, I've no sisters, so I'd no female presence there to talk it through with. As I said, my GP was great, but my husband's side of the family were this sort of old-fashioned family where they just didn't talk about things, and they certainly didn't talk about it in front of me. And I found that very difficult.
Yeah, because you're in this, you want to say Noah's name.
Of
he
course.
has a name. That's one of the most things people can't wait for when somebody has a baby. What are they going to call it? So they can either go, that's gorgeous, or what are you thinking? Do you know what I mean? And then you have a baby, he has a name, but no one's saying his name.
No one would speak of his name, and every time they'd talk about somebody else's baby, there was this, leave the room. I remember somebody else got pregnant, they were writing a card for them, and they all went outside. And I was like, guys, I know what you're doing. I'm not stupid here. Have the conversation with me. I'm not fragile. And then I think somewhere along the way, a couple of months in after that, my sister-in-law had a baby. And we were pregnant at the same time. She had a little boy, and I was like, I didn't want to hold him, no. I didn't want to look at him. I certainly didn't want to hold him. I thought I'd actually vomit. That feeling was just unbelievable. My husband didn't deal with any of this well either, because it affects everybody involved in the relationship. And everyone just kept pushing this baby on me. I thought at that stage I would just run. I felt like running. I felt like just if I could get out that front door and run, I was in Bray at the time, if I could run towards the seafront, I wouldn't stop. I struggled, I really did. I struggled very, very hard with my mental health that year. I didn't go back to work. I'd gone out on maternity leave. I probably should have gone back to work. It probably would have been very good for me. But at the time, sure, I couldn't have had a conversation with the person, never mind. I was working for Fine Gael at the time. I was working in comms. There's absolutely no way I could have handled a candidate. The stress of it. I could barely get dressed. And I was lucky, I suppose. I had therapy and went through that phase of being able... But it was a year. It was a year before I started feeling myself again. But nobody, people where I lived in Greystones, crossed the street.
Do you think that's just they didn't know what to say?
Probably.
So, but did that not make the grief much worse?
Much worse for me, because I had no one to share it with. I had no one to share that burden with. People weren't able to say the word. weren't able to commiserate, weren't able to say, I'm sorry your baby died. I'm sorry that you had to have a funeral and bury your child. I get it, maybe one person. But it seemed collective. It seemed that everywhere I went, people would literally turn away. It made me actually move out of the town that I was living in at the time because it became too uncomfortable for me. And then if people would say, oh, have you got children? I said, yeah, I had a little boy, Noah. He was stillborn. And people's faces. You wouldn't believe it. So people's reaction to me and what I was trying to be my truth and what I was trying to say was shock. Now, I get people don't understand how to deal with other people's grief, but I ended up minding the people. I ended up saying...
minding you.
Yeah. I end up saying to people, oh, it's okay, don't worry, like, you know, I'm getting over it, I'm dealing, I'm not... And I'm there, actually, I shouldn't have to be in this position where I say to you, you're okay. And I think really a lot of it has to do, it's not spoken about. Even miscarriages aren't really spoken about. Now, 15 years ago, times have changed coming up to now.
Yeah, and there are a lot more interviews and there are a lot more articles in the paper and stuff. But what would you know, this has come up frequently about people not knowing what to say to anybody, no matter what their grief is or their relationship to the person who's died. What would you say to people they should think about saying to somebody like you 15 years ago?
Well, honestly, if you're not able to, as a person, if you're not able to ask a person, are they okay? And actually get a real answer, well, then don't ask the question and do cross the road. But if you want to ask somebody, are they okay? Be prepared to listen and be prepared to that person to say, no, I'm not okay. I'm not handling this very well. I haven't been out of my pajamas in 3 weeks. I don't know who I am anymore. My hormones are still all over the place. I should be dealing with a newborn and I'm not. And I don't know if I'll ever have another child. Be prepared for not having a good answer. Because we all expect, I think, when people to put on the brave face. And why should we have to put on the brave face when we're grieving? Let people grieve. But
the way they want.
The way they want. But be prepared when somebody says, no, I'm not doing okay. Have the conversation if you're able.
Would that have made, do you think, it slightly easier to manage? Have people be more open?
I'm a very open person. I think it's just in my personality. It doesn't matter whether I'm a journalist or a broadcaster or anything, but I'm a very open person and I do talk about things and I would always sit down with somebody in relation to grief and bring up people's death and such like, or anything they want to talk about. That's my personality. So I suppose having that personality and everybody else being shut down, I found incredibly hard. So yes, if anybody at the time had been able to even sit in the same room as me without hopping up and going and making a cup of tea. And the one thing I heard all the time, every single time, was, oh, don't worry, you'll have another one.
Yeah.
If I heard that once, I heard
At least you'll have another
50 times.
Yeah.
And no, I was 39 years of age. I'd already lost 7 babies, 7 pregnancies. And I think my gynaecologist said there may have been more in early stage that we didn't know about.
Yeah. With 7, and, you know, there have been a lot of interviews and articles with different people and they've had multiple miscarriages. And just what you're saying there about Noah, oh, well, you'll have another one. And, you know, some days a miscarriage, it's like, well, at least they've got 2 others.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's okay, you know. So I'm just wondering about that with this, you had 7. Where do you get the strength to go, we're going to go again? We're going to go again. Anna.
I wanted to be a mother more than I wanted anything else in the world. And I still mourn that. At my age, in my 50s, I mourn the fact I never got the chance. So I suppose against the odds, I just kept going. And every time I got pregnant again, I was grateful. Very, very grateful. And I thought, well, this is my chance. This is my chance. I don't know where I got the strength. It was probably more determination than anything else, because I desperately wanted to be a mother. I felt it was a role for me. I felt that's what would fulfill me. And the emptiness that leaves is unconscionable.
And then, you know, you get to so far down the line, like a lot of people don't like discussing it before a certain time.
Yes.
You know, some people are quite happy to tell people straight away. Did you ever feel sort of cheated?
Yes, absolutely. I still do, in a way. I consider myself quite healed. I work on myself as best I possibly can. Yes, I feel cheated. Very much so. I feel maybe there is something. I'm quite spiritual in some ways, but I'm not religious. But I do feel that maybe there is something else in life for me. But I feel very cheated that the biological thing I wanted, I couldn't have. If I want something else in life, like to buy a house or to go for a job, that's about putting the work in. That's about going after something. That's about doing it.
But this you've no
But
control
this,
over.
absolutely no control over it. And I came up then against, I'm afraid my husband then just went, no, I'm not going there.
So there was no
discussion.
Adoption or IVF or anything like that?
No, he wouldn't. I think that put a huge strain on our marriage then afterwards.
Well, such huge loss. That would anyway,
yes,
I would assume.
Huge loss. And I wanted to adopt. I'm adopted. So, yes, I'm adopted. And I thought, well, great. I had this amazing upbringing, this amazing home with these fantastic people who had suffered their own losses with babies. And I thought, do you know what? I will be amazing at this. My mother was amazing. I can do this.
Yeah.
Wouldn't entertain the papers, wouldn't entertain fostering, and certainly IVF for trying again naturally. The man was done. Yeah. And in that way I do respect him, because we all grieve differently and we all look at things differently. His want to be a parent wasn't the same as mine.
I wonder, I mean, like there's some of us that do want to, you know, that's their mission. There's other people who don't want kids.
Absolutely. And I'm a huge... It's funny, people do assume, they see me at work and they would see, oh, you know, there's a journalist in her 50s and career came over family. And they automatically assume, if somebody says to me, do you have kids? And I go, no. Because again, you get to the point where, unless it's somebody you know.
Yeah, and you don't want to go down there.
You're not going down there with somebody you barely know. The assumption is, nah. She took career over family. And they couldn't be further wrong. But I'm not going to get into that conversation with somebody I've just met. Even people that I've worked in newsrooms for years and years never knew I had a child. Because it just became part of a story that I never got to tell. I wanted to write about it very much so at the time. I don't think I was in the right headspace, but I came back to it a couple of years later and I thought, I'm going to write about this. And again, I came up against this huge opposition from my husband at the time, who didn't want our business and our grief
to be public.
But part of me thought about the catharsis of writing and creating, and how I express myself. And I express myself through things that have happened to me, especially creatively. And I really wanted to get that out there. And until I'm sitting here with you, this is the first time I've ever spoken about it publicly.
How do you feel?
Better than I thought I would. Yeah, better than I thought I would. I wasn't sure how I would feel, but I love you as a person, and I've worked with you before. So I said to you before this interview, I put myself in your hands. Because I know, sitting down with Venetia Clack, with the broadcaster that I know, the person, the human I know, and your experiences through life, I knew you'd lead me through this. So I feel a lot better, yes.
Oh. We were talking about men, and sometimes there are difficulties with talking about what you've been through.
Yes.
Or as a couple. And perhaps, and a lot has been said about miscarriage, particularly in the past, that sometimes men get left out.
I think they do.
In that it's all about, obviously, the mum first of all, and people can forget that for guys that's a really hard thing as well, and that's when there can be other issues. Is that something you think that should be more, people should talk about more?
I think any kind of couple, whether they go through IVF, whatever sex they are, whatever relationship they are, but with a male and a female relationship, you go through this. You want to have a child together. You talk about having a child together. You make that decision whether it's going to suit your life financially, how it's going to be your future together. I think when a miscarriage, a late miscarriage, or a stillbirth, or even a child that's born a couple of days and then dies, I think any of those tragedies with pregnancy and birth, it's all focused on the woman. And I think, well, yes, of course, she carries the baby. She's the one who is actually pregnant and then the one who has lost the baby. But you go into it as a couple. And I think the focus then ends up on the woman. I don't think men are thought about enough. And then maybe they're made to seem, they have to be strong. So it's the man's job to look after the woman, to be supportive. But you're a couple, you're two people together. But it goes back to the fact that nobody's talking about the emotion and how the couple feel. Who sits down with a man and a woman and says, that's terrible, you've lost 2 babies, 4 babies. Who sits there with both of them? It's like the women will sit with the woman and they'll focus, if she's lucky enough. I wasn't, unfortunately, lucky enough. I was very lucky with my friends later in life. That's another story. I came across childhood friends later on, and they became a support system actually 10 years after it.
Wow.
Which is another part of the story. But I think my ex-husband did not get the support that he needed emotionally or mentally. No.
Yeah, I wonder, is there a bit of sort of judgment in one way towards, no, maybe judgment's the wrong word, but, is it sort of,
is there an expectation maybe?
Yeah.
That men are supposed to be strong or a failing. I don't know.
I don't know. It's just sort of like, is there weakness maybe is the word?
Well, maybe men, it's like if a man loses his job or can't pay rent, it does seem to affect them more as in their masculinity than it does a woman. We tend to just go, well, I'll go out and sweep the streets. It doesn't affect me. I'll just change career, change job, get a degree, do something, stand on my head. We deal with things very differently. I think maybe it is a masculinity thing, and maybe they see that losing a child and losing many children is something wrong with their masculinity. But the fault was actually with me, which I found out later that it was my body that was rejecting. I have a rare blood group, and it was never seen as a problem until they discovered a large blood cell that I have. It's something called macrocytosis. And it means I can't absorb folic acid. And what do we need for babies is folic acid.
So simple as that.
Very,
something as simple
very
as that.
Simple as that. But it was medicine that had moved on that came across those things as I. But at the time, they gave me an aspirin.
Do you feel angry about that? Does that sort of...
Yeah. Look, I get waves of anger. I get waves of grief. I get waves of... whoa, why did this have to happen to me? And then you see these, people who have drug addiction problems having babies, and perfectly healthy babies. And, I did everything right and had my carrot juice and went for my walks and it didn't happen. So you get those waves, but as you go on, but it is go on, because initially the anger and the pain, it all comes out. As you go on, you think, oh my God, if only they'd have known that at the time. If only that had happened. So yeah, there are waves, there are days. There are days where
And how do you deal with sort of all this, the Hallmark holidays, like the Mother's Days and,
This goes back to my friends. And my friends all say, but you are a mother. Just because you don't have live children, you are a mother. They send me Happy Mother's Day texts. They buy me flowers. We have Mother's Day lunches together. So, yeah, they very much include me. We were all pregnant at the same time. 3 of us were pregnant at the same time. And I look at, and all boys, and I look at their 2 boys. And they came back into my life for a reason, those girls, that I was friends with as a child. And they came back into my life as very definitely for a reason.
And how do you feel around their boys?
I'm great around their boys. I love
Yeah.
their boys. I'm still not great around babies.
Yeah.
Still, it's
Yeah.
the baby thing that I'm still not great around. I take my time around babies. But no, I look at those boys and I try not to think what Noah would be like at that stage going into first year in school. But of course, you can't help it. You can't help but look at it.
Because you do, I'm sure, wonder what would he be into? Or
Of course.
would he be a GAA player or a football player or neither? Or
Rugby, of course.
Yeah.
Rugby.
Oh,
If he
okay.
was my son,
Playing
rugby.
for Ireland.
Of course, absolutely.
But-
I try not to do too much of that because it's not healthy, I think, for me. I don't know how anybody else would feel about that. I don't think it's healthy to go through every milestone. There are certain ones that will hit you. So it would be the first day of big school, or it would be a 16th birthday, or it would be something like that. I'm sure when it comes to his 21st birthday. So I try to not let it be a huge focus every day. That doesn't go to say that I don't have his blanket and his christening candle. Well, it wasn't a christening candle, but his
birth candle.
His birth candle. I don't have those things in my wardrobe when I sit there. And the photographs. I have his photographs of his feet and what he looked like. I have those things and I do take them out and I do look at them. But I have to get on and I have to move on. And the one thing I don't want to be is bitter.
Yeah.
I don't mind being sad. And I don't mind...
But they're two different things.
They're very different things. And I don't mind sitting there and grieving to myself or even with my girlfriends and having a good cry and talking it all out. And we still do. We still talk it out and we go for walks and talk about things. But I don't want to be the woman that sits there and goes, oh, well, now he'd be here and he'd be there. Because I don't think that's healthy. But that's my way of dealing with
I
it.
agree.
Everybody
And I
deals
think-
with things differently. But my way of dealing with it is to never forget, to always remember him and to think on his birthday. That's the day I find very difficult. Is
What date's his birthday?
the 25th of October.
So Halloween.
Halloween
Halloween
baby, yeah.
baby.
Yeah, it's funny. And I still have his first Halloween costume that I bought, a little sort of Batman, little Batman suit, a little baby grow Batman suit. And I have it.
Yeah.
You know, and again,
Yeah.
it's with the baby blanket and it's with those little things and his little photographs and all the beautiful cards and all the lovely letters people did write me. So some people were phenomenal, but that was that. And
Yeah.
you know, it's like everyone says everyone's great at a funeral and then talk to people a month later, you know,
Yeah.
when people
Well,
can't
that's-
talk about grief.
That's life, though, as well.
It
in
is
a
life.
lot of ways.
And we
you
all
know.
move on and you can't stop people having children.
No.
And you can't stop. Some of my friends have just become grandmothers.
But you
you
do
know?
think of the other people who maybe, lost their babies when you're a parent. You do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think being women is an amazing thing. Being able to conceive and being able to carry a baby for whatever time you can. The lucky ones have beautiful children. Those of us not so lucky grieve, and it never leaves you. It's a different type of grief to losing I've lost both my parents, grandparents, friends, but losing your child, I think,
It's a different thing.
it's a pain. It's an absolute wound that I hope heals eventually, but also I don't want it to heal too much, because if it heals too much, will I lose the feeling? Will I lose the sense of him? But I think people need to recognise that when women lose children, they never really heal. But the best way to help them heal is to talk to them. To just be prepared to say, hi, I'm really sorry.
And to listen.
And to listen.
So that would be your advice.
Oh, absolutely.
To anybody. And
Just-
for anybody who's gone through what you've gone through. Of
Male
which-
or female.
Yeah.
Male or female, for any parent. And it does affect the wider family as well. Because someone's lost a niece, a nephew, a cousin. You know, I remember my sister-in-law's little kids at the time, you know, including them in their prayers. And it's amazing how children have no problem speaking about it. It's the adults that shut themselves down and say, oh, we can't talk about that. Oh, no, we better not say anything about that. Whereas children will just go, and God bless Noah. Because that was their way.
Yeah.
That was their way.
Yeah.
It's the innocence of it. So if we try to go back a little bit to how we automatically, naturally feel, I think it makes it easier for a lot of people. And look, don't cross the road. Don't walk away from the person. You don't have to sit down and have a cup of tea, but a smile will help when somebody is having, especially early on, when somebody's having just the worst day. And that's not just the mother, that's the father, that's a member of family who's lost a child.
Thank you so much, Breffni.
Thank you, Venetia.
And, you know, because I know that we sort of talked a little bit about Noah before, but this has been the first time that we've really had that.
It is. And can I say to you, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. You can listen on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have an online community on Facebook, The Grief Pod, or on Instagram @GriefPod Series.